Okay, so we have a bunch of things to get into today. First, I want to start with Jimmy Kimmel. So he came back on last night and he apparently had 6.5 million people tune in to watch his comeback. And there were some states that were not airing his show. And he made a lot of funny jokes throughout the moment, just poking fun of the situation. But he also made sure that he advocated for the fact that we should have free speech and the government should not be trying to come for comedy or satire where people make fun of other people and the government for whatever decisions they are making. And so a lot of people supported this just because of the fact that they do not want free speech challenged in any sort of way. But a lot of people still had issues with what Jimmy Kimmel said in the show that got him canceled or suspended. And I think that he really hit home that coming for free speech is un-American. In America, you can say whatever you want. Obviously, you deal with the consequences of that. So free speech does not mean free from consequences, and he obviously experienced that. But I do think it is good that they brought back his show, one, because he should have that platform regardless of ratings and all of that stuff to be able to speak. Now, if you want to cancel his show or end his show because the ratings are bad or because people don't like his content, that's fair, but I don't think he should be canceled for one thing that he says that people just happen to not like. However, in my first video on this, I did clarify that I thought the second part of what he said was funny, where he was poking fun of Donald Trump's reaction or response to a question from a reporter. We got to see that with our own eyes what Donald Trump did, and then he made a joke. Whereas with the first situation, if you had no idea what was going on and you took him at face value, you would have thought that, oh, the right people, the Republicans, are trying to lie and cover up and blame us for this situation when it was actually one of them and all of that stuff. And so generally speaking, it's more divisive language that I don't like seeing. And so from that aspect, that's why I don't like it, because there were a lot of people who were basically pointing fingers and blaming the other side, whereas very few people were actually calling for unity. And so with that show that he did that got him suspended, he was definitely being divisive when he said that first part of his show. And there's also a lot of hypocrisy being pointed out, because he did mention that Brendan Carr, he made some tweet about basically going after free speech and criticizing the government, and he reveals this quote and then he reveals who said it. And so it's just pointing out the hypocrisy of letting certain people speak and not letting other people speak. I did think that the Robert De Niro part was funny, because obviously I didn't expect Brendan Carr to be there, but it was just funny because he's tapping into that mobster, gangster energy and threatening Jimmy Kimmel over what he was saying, and so that part is funny. They're poking fun of the situation, that's what they're supposed to do, but obviously you should do that in a tasteful way, especially after something tragic happens, as with what happened to Charlie Kirk. And two other relevant jokes that he made fun of were the elevator and the teleprompter situation, where in both situations the elevator stopped working, or the escalator rather stopped working as soon as Trump got near it, and then the teleprompter broke, and so he had to wing his speech or at least just go off of memory. And so two things happening like that back to back is kind of crazy. And then the other thing they poked fun of was Tylenol, but interestingly, I have been seeing this all over Twitter, where basically people found a tweet from 2017 where Tylenol said, hey, we don't recommend pregnant women using this. And I'll see if I can add the screenshot here, because that's not exact quote, but basically they're saying, hey, don't use this medication in certain conditions. And so I found that super interesting, because we do have people getting really upset with him and RFK making the announcement that Tylenol is supposedly the cause of autism and all of that stuff. That's not the exact word-for-word explanation of what they said, but if you've seen the articles or the press conference, you understand that's kind of the general gist, right? And so there have been people who have been reacting to this, and they've been saying, hey, Tylenol is safe, I'm going to take it anyway, and blah, blah, blah. And so there is this really weird reaction, especially if you refer back to that 2017 post from Tylenol's own Twitter page or X page. And I did see a funny comment where someone's like, oh, this is not accurate because X didn't exist in 2017 and blah, blah, blah. Obviously, the comment was posted on Twitter, which became X. And so even if that was not a genuine and a real post, I thought that was funny, because you can put the dots together that was from Twitter. And so very interesting to see that post and then also see how people are reacting. And I also saw another comment that was really good because it said that basically science can change over time. Like you do a study at one time, you find whatever results you get, and then you may repeat the study or do a slightly different study and the numbers are different, right? And so the idea that science can change over time, it makes sense to me, but then it also backs up or affirms the idea that science isn't always accurate, especially if you're not sharing all of your results and you're just looking for certain numbers. And so that's just an interesting thing to think about. Moving on, I want to talk about Candace's episode. So today she talked about Thomas Matthew Crook. She talked about how she was able to find some old videos of him shooting guns and posting these crazy messages on social media. And I believe she was contacted with that information. And so she's revealing, hey, you know, Thomas Matthew Crook, he was basically on the right and the left. He was very pro-Trump and very aggressive, very angry, posting crazy stuff. And then around COVID, he flipped and then he was really mad at Trump. And then obviously the attempted assassination happened. And so what she was pointing at is that there's this effort to pin the left against the right and keep you focused on that battle while other stuff is going on in broad daylight that we're not paying attention to because we're so focused on things that don't matter. We're not focused on the bigger picture, which is the battle between good and evil. The other thing that I found super interesting was what she played with Megyn Kelly. And basically Megyn Kelly said that there was this site, Jezebel, where somebody posted this article saying, hey, you know, we want to put a hex on Charlie Kirk. The Kirks found out about it and they were very concerned, and they consulted with a friend or a Catholic priest to basically try to combat that hex and reverse it and all of that stuff, right? And so a lot of people are like, oh, well, you know, this doesn't matter because if you believe in God, this hex, witches, state, and all of that stuff, they're not more powerful than God. But I think what this comes down to is the idea of free will. So obviously Charlie has free will, but so does the person who shot him, right? If I was not just a lone gunman and other people were involved, those people had free will. And so obviously God can't prevent certain people from having free will, and that's why certain things happen, because when something bad happens you always think, oh, why did God let this happen? And really the answer in my opinion is because of free will. And so I do believe in conspiracy theories. I do believe in this idea that there's the witchcraft, there's good witches, there's bad witches, there's stuff going on spiritually that a lot of us either don't know about, don't believe, or we do know about and we do believe. And so I do believe that this probably happened, and it's really crazy to think that you can go on Etsy of all sites and buy someone or buy services to put a hex on someone. And I did work with two women at one of my jobs in New York City, and they were witches, they were African, they were witches, and they basically had experiences. I think one of them actually had an experience where basically she would black out and she would be possessed by a spirit or whatever. And so that was really crazy, but I fully believe in that. And so I think something like this definitely probably happened, but I don't think it's the only reason why Charlie Kirk's assassination happened. Again, other people had free will, and this is what makes this situation really crazy, because he was basically being attacked from so many different angles, and we're all really trying to figure out what happened here and who exactly is involved. And this brings me to Anna Kasparian and Jillian Michaels. They were on a show called Her Takes, and I don't know if this is Anna Kasparian's show and Jillian Michaels is just making an appearance, but they got into this conversation over the offer for $150 million, which is super interesting. It has been talked about on Twitter because people are really trying to figure out where that number came from. And I saw an interesting Twitter thread where someone was trying to figure out that information, and there was one comment that basically where someone had the same experience as me, where they watched Candace's show on the 15th and then they watched Nick's show later that night on the 15th as well, and they said that they heard that $150 million number from Nick on his show, which is the same experience that I had. But between Candace's show and Nick's show, I don't know if I read anything on social media that said 150, because I did go to the Gray Zone articles that were posted about this on the 12th and the 15th, and if you command F, you can't see 150 in that article, so I don't think that number came from the article. So for me, I first remember hearing it on Nick's show, but I don't know if I would have heard that number or saw that number anywhere else before Nick's show. And so anyway, they're having this conversation about 150, the 150 million, where did it come from? what's the evidence to prove this? And Jillian is really upset about this, and she's having a bad week or two because first she got called out or trashed on social media for the 2% of slave owners comment, and then she went on Uncensored with Piers Morgan with Amazing Lucas, and he did not pull his punches either. He was very direct with her about his feelings on what she said and her having a black daughter. And so I did not like Amazing Lucas's appearance on that episode of Uncensored. I thought that he was just really digging his heels in, and he didn't really have any empathy or understanding that what he did was wrong. He was really just playing tit for tat, and so I did not like that, but he did call Jillian out to her face. Now we have Jillian on her take, and she's freaking out about this. She said that she didn't want to talk about it, but they brought it up anyway. And so my thinking is, if you know that they're possibly going to bring this topic up, why would you not do your homework or your research, or have your team do their research so that you can come prepared to talk about this $150 million offer, even if you don't want to? And so anyway, they are reading some, tweet on the screen. They're saying, hey, in this Gray Zone article, it was reported that Charlie Kirk was offered $150 million. And so she's like, where's your evidence? And they're like, oh, well, this is the source. And then someone brings up Candace, and she's like, oh, well, even Charlie Kirk's own people said that they hadn't seen each other and blah, blah, blah. So obviously, she didn't do her homework on the $150 million offer to figure out where that came from. And then she's behind on the Candace stuff, because Candace on her show either yesterday, which would have been Tuesday, or Monday, she played a clip of Charlie Kirk talking about her directly. And basically he was saying, hey, we're good friends. I don't agree with everything that she says, but if you tell me not to be friends with somebody, I'm going to be friends with them, and blah, 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 right? Because there was one video circulating that I talked about where a audience member asked Charlie a question about Candace Owens, a few other people, and then people, I guess, just talking about Israel, Jewish people, and all of that stuff, right? And he says, hey, I'm not going to debate Candace, but then he goes into this other part of the question and answers it, and people are like, oh, he's talking about Candace, he's calling her a demon. And then Candace found that clip, and I don't know exactly what, I guess, show or appearance it's from. I'm still trying to find that, but basically Charlie Kirk is defending their friendship, right? And so Jillian Michaels is out of the loop on that, and so I think this looks very bad for her that she's out of the loop on those two things, because the offer for $150 million is super relevant. So why it's relevant is because $150 million is a lot of money, especially if this offer is being given to be in more support of Israel, the Israel government, and all of that stuff, right? So if you're already pro-Israel, why would you turn down this money? And so Andrew Clovet, if I'm saying his last name correctly, he mentioned that they do not accept foreign money. They only accept American money. So if this was an offer directly from Netanyahu, I think he's setting up the argument that, oh, well, if this were a real offer, we would have declined it because it came from foreign money, right? And so there's that kind of argument against it. But again, why would someone decline that much money? And so since we don't really know the answer to that, we need to look at other things. The other argument that was being made was that he turned down a trip to Israel. So again, he went to Israel before. He really liked it. He is really protective of Israel and what that place means in terms of Christianity and the Bible. So we can understand his connection to that country, that place. So why would he turn down that trip? The other thing that we need to look at is what was Charlie saying publicly. And the reason why I'm saying that we need to look at evidence of what he was saying publicly is because anybody can find that. We can't go through everybody's text messages or whatever to see what private conversations he was having, but we can look at what he has been saying in his different interviews, appearances, and all of that stuff, right? And so a lot of it points to the being some type of friction or some type of frustration with Israel, whatever he was doing, and the things that he wanted to do that clashed with whatever other people wanted him to do. And so I think that the argument or the conversation around the $150 million offer is super relevant to this question because it helps us get closer to figuring out what exactly happened here. Because again, going back to the idea of someone putting a hex on Charlie Kirk, that could be just one part of it, but that doesn't explain everything. there's so many different things that are going on in the situation, and that's why a lot of people are investing their time in investigating this and figuring out what actually happened, or at least trying to, because some people may be comforted by thinking, oh, this is just a spiritual thing, we don't have control over it. But I do think that there's probably elements going on here that we do have some sort of control over, and you would want to know that, so that one, you can prevent that from happening, and you can also protect your people from experiencing that same thing. So I think that this is a super relevant conversation, and there's so many pieces that are being talked about right now, and I think that it was kind of unfair for Jillian to not want to have this conversation, because people are really trying to figure out, like, hey, where did this story come from? Who's the first person who reported this number and all of this stuff? And I think that is important, because now it kind of feels like people are kind of being tricked into thinking that they didn't read that article or they didn't hear that number. And it's kind of that, what is the term that I'm thinking of? It's like when you, what is it called? I have to look up the number, add it in the screen, but it's basically like, I'll give you an example so I can demonstrate what I'm talking about. So is it the Bernstein Bears? A lot of people say that they remember it being spelled one way, but it's actually spelled a different way. And so basically the idea is that you remember something differently from how it actually was. It's really weird to say, but if I can find the word that describes or is what I'm talking about, I'll add that to the screen. And so, very interesting conversation and very relevant. Alrighty, so that's everything that I wanted to talk about in this episode. Let me know your thoughts on Jimmy Kimmel, Jillian Michaels, Anna Kasparian, Candace Owens, and all of that good stuff. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.